Welcome to HOA Stories. I never thought a quiet hobby could make me public enemy number one in my own neighborhood. That morning, the sun had just begun to break over the cul-de-sac, scattering gold across the dew-covered lawns of Maple Ridge Estates. It was the kind of suburban calm you only see in real estate brochures: fresh paint, trimmed hedges, and a faint hum of sprinklers clicking in rhythm. I had my coffee steaming beside me as I tuned the dials on my ham radio, listening to static ease into soft voices bouncing from half a world away. For a retired communications engineer like me, it wasn't just a hobby, it was a lifeline to something bigger than the HOA's picket fences. But in Maple Ridge, the HOA didn't like anything they couldn't control. 2 weeks before that morning, I'd received my first violation notice. According to the HOA president, a sharp-tongued woman named Karen Wilcox, my ham radio antenna disrupted the aesthetic cohesion of the neighborhood. I'd tried explaining that it was fully legal, licensed by the FCC, and barely visible from the street. But reason doesn't work on people who crave power more than peace. Karen wasn't satisfied with warnings. She called meetings, sent out emails dripping with phrases like non-compliance and community safety concerns. When that didn't work, she went door to door, stirring up fear, claiming my setup interfered with local Wi-Fi and even might attract hackers. That morning, as the radio crackled with chatter from a distant weather station in Alaska, I heard something else: the faint grind of metal from behind my garage. I thought it was just the landscapers. But a moment later, my signal died. Silence. When I stepped outside, I saw it: my coaxial cables, neatly severed, the ends dangling like dead vines. Karen stood across the street, arms folded, smiling with the smugness of someone who believed she'd just won. HOA property standards, she said simply, before turning back toward her driveway. But what Karen didn't know, what none of them knew, was that by cutting those cables, she hadn't just silenced a radio. She'd tampered with a federally licensed communication line. And within 72 hours, black SUVs would be crawling down our pristine little street. Before all of this spiraled into government agents and black SUVs, life in Maple Ridge felt almost too perfect, the kind of neighborhood that tried so hard to be peaceful, it ended up suffocating you with it. My wife, Ellen, and I had moved here 3 years after my retirement from a 30-year career in communications engineering. The neighborhood had everything we thought we wanted: tree-lined streets, a community pond with ducks, and neighbors who waved from their driveways. For a while, it really did feel like home. Across from us lived the Wilcoxes, Karen and her husband, Don. Don was polite enough, a quiet man who seemed to have learned the art of nodding silently while his wife handled everything. Karen, on the other hand, treated the HOA like her personal kingdom. She'd been president for 8 years, long enough for her name to be etched onto the little bronze plaque by the clubhouse entrance. Every month, she'd deliver community updates printed on glossy paper, pages of rules disguised as neighborly advice. Maintain harmony through uniformity, she'd always say at meetings. I thought it was funny at first, the way she'd inspect flower beds and measure fence heights like some suburban inspector general. But over time, that smile she wore stopped looking friendly. It began subtly. The first warning I ever got from the HOA wasn't about my radio, it was about my mailbox. Apparently, the color had faded to an unacceptable shade of gray. I repainted it, even though the difference was microscopic. Then came the one about my porch clutter, which was just 2 flower pots and an old bird feeder. Still, I played along. Ellen said it wasn't worth making waves. You always say people like her eventually hang themselves with their own rope, she'd remind me. She was right, but back then, I didn't realize how long that rope was. The real turning point started the day I set up my ham radio tower. It wasn't even much, just a small antenna mounted discreetly behind my garage, out of view from the street. I'd cleared it with local zoning and held an FCC license. For me, ham radio wasn't just nostalgia, it was connection. After decades of building communication systems, I couldn't imagine cutting myself off from the world just because retirement told me to slow down. Within a week, I started getting curious looks. Neighbors I used to chat with began crossing the street instead. One morning, Mrs. Delaney, a sweet woman who used to bring us lemon bars, left a folded note in my mailbox. Just be careful. Karen's been talking about you at meetings. Says your tower might cause interference or something worse. I laughed it off at first, but a seed of unease had already taken root. At the next HOA meeting, Karen brought up unregulated electronic structures. The moment she said it, her eyes flicked toward me. The crowd murmured, words like signals, privacy, and health hazards echoed faintly. I stood to explain, calmly showing my federal authorization and local permits. But she smiled that practiced smile and said, "We'll look into it." That phrase, "we'll look into it," became her favorite threat. After that meeting, little things began happening. My mail would arrive half-opened. My trash cans mysteriously vanished one morning and reappeared 2 streets away. One evening, Ellen spotted a man with a clipboard pacing near our fence. When I stepped outside to ask what he was doing, he flashed a quick smile and said, "HOA compliance check," before leaving without another word. It wasn't until a week later that I noticed the same man again, standing by the community pond, pointing a small laser rangefinder toward my property. Surveying. When I brought it up at the next meeting, Karen's expression didn't waver. "Routine boundary maintenance," she said sweetly. "Just making sure everyone's within the guidelines." But I knew the look of someone mapping out a problem. I'd spent decades reading signal grids and interference patterns. Paranoia wasn't my nature, but intuition was. That night, as Ellen slept, I went outside and walked the perimeter of our lot. The air was still, the kind that makes every leaf sound like a whisper. From the darkness behind my garage, I could see the faint glimmer of my radio antenna, steady, silent, harmless. Then I noticed something small but chilling. A wooden stake had been hammered into the dirt near the tower, a strip of red surveyor's tape fluttering faintly in the breeze. Scribbled in marker were the words, "Pending violation." That's when I realized, this wasn't about property aesthetics anymore. It was personal. And in Maple Ridge, when something became personal for Karen Wilcox, it usually didn't end quietly. It was a quiet Tuesday when I found one sitting in my mailbox, the kind with a crisp HOA letterhead and Karen's signature looped in blue ink. Inside was a final notice of violation. According to the document, my ham radio antenna was not only aesthetic non-compliance, but also a potential national security concern pending investigation. National security? The phrasing stopped me cold. I'd seen bureaucratic overreach before, but this was beyond HOA authority. Something wasn't right. I called the county zoning office the next morning to verify the claim. After a few transfers, a tired-sounding clerk finally said, "Sir, there's no such inquiry listed. And your property's fully compliant. You're fine on our end." I thanked her, but the relief didn't come. Instead, I felt something darker, that creeping suspicion that someone was fabricating more than rules. A few days later, while sorting through paperwork in my garage, I noticed something odd on one of the HOA community maps Karen had distributed during the last meeting. My property was outlined, but slightly smaller than the county's version I'd printed months before. Almost half of the space where my antenna stood was shaded gray, labeled Common Utility Zone. That wasn't true. I pulled my original deed and survey plans from my file cabinet. Every measurement confirmed what I already knew, that corner of land was mine, purchased, titled, and approved decades before. But on Karen's version, the boundary had been redrawn, subtly, but enough to justify HOA intervention. I needed proof. That evening, I walked over to Don Wilcox's house. His garage door was open, and he was tinkering with his lawnmower. He looked startled to see me. "Don," I said gently, "I need to ask you something. Did the HOA change the property maps?" He hesitated, wiped his hands, and looked toward the front window, as if checking whether Karen was watching. "You didn't hear it from me," he muttered, "but Karen's been working with a local developer. They want to extend the fiber line behind your house for some new smart home infrastructure. She's trying to reclassify that corner as HOA easement. Says your tower's in the way." My stomach sank. So that was it. This wasn't about aesthetics or rules. It was about money and power. Karen had been maneuvering to sell a portion of our community's shared land rights, and my tiny ham tower had become her obstacle. "Don," I asked quietly, "does anyone else know?" He shook his head. "She told the board it was routine maintenance. The others didn't ask questions. They never do." When I got home, I stood for a long time in the dark kitchen, staring out toward the backyard where my tower stood, its metal glinting faintly under the porch light. Ellen came downstairs, rubbing her eyes. "What happened?" she asked softly. I told her everything, the fake maps, the lies, the secret deal. She listened in silence, her face pale. When I finished, she whispered, "You should report her." "I will," I said, "but not yet." In the days that followed, I began piecing everything together. Karen's fake boundary line had been included in HOA board filings. She'd even used my supposed non-compliance as a way to justify applying for a new utility grant. If approved, she would have received a hefty kickback from the developer, all while labeling me as a security risk to keep neighbors quiet. The brilliance of it, in a dark way, was how ordinary it all looked. HOA bureaucracy is like fog, it hides corruption in paperwork and signatures. But there's one thing Karen hadn't accounted for. Every time she filed a fake report or sent an email to justify her actions, she used public infrastructure, including FCC-licensed frequencies she didn't have permission to reference. And as a former communications engineer, I knew exactly how to trace them. That night, I sat in my workshop with my old radio logs, FCC contacts, and a quiet, deliberate calm. I wasn't angry anymore. I was methodical. As Ellen watched from the doorway, I said the words that would become the heartbeat of everything that followed: "I won't fight in anger, I'll wait." There's a strange calm that comes after betrayal, the kind that's sharper than anger, colder than grief. It's focus. After that night, I stopped arguing. I stopped responding to Karen's letters, stopped showing up to meetings, stopped giving her anything to feed on. I let her believe she'd won. On the surface, I went quiet, but underneath, every move became deliberate. The first thing I did was pull the county parcel records. I spent hours cross-referencing my deed with public maps, every boundary marker, every surveyor's note. Sure enough, a new file had been added to the system, uploaded by Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. The timestamp matched the week Karen had hosted that special board meeting. The new version showed the eastern edge of my yard, where my ham antenna stood, labeled as proposed easement zone. But here's what caught my eye: it wasn't signed by the county registrar. It was just stamped. Someone had copied the county seal and faked the official mark. That was my first piece of evidence. Next, I filed a Freedom of Information Act request, a quiet one, to the county zoning office, asking for all communication logs between the HOA and the developer Karen mentioned. While I waited, I combed through archived HOA minutes online. Most people didn't realize those documents were public under state HOA transparency laws. And there it was, buried in the April minutes: discussion on partnership with Allied Fiber Expansion Project. Motion to authorize HOA representative to negotiate preliminary access to easement zones. Representative, Karen Wilcox. No other board members had signed. No community vote had taken place. It was completely illegal. Still, I knew paper trails alone wouldn't expose her, not in a neighborhood like ours, where everyone wanted peace more than truth. So I needed something undeniable. Late at night, I began logging the signal activity around our community's broadband frequencies, purely habit at first, part of my ham monitoring. But one night, I noticed something unusual, a repeating burst of encrypted data every evening around 10:45 p.m., transmitted from a local IP block registered under Maple Ridge HOA network. HOAs don't have encrypted data transmissions. Developers and city contractors do. Using my old spectrum analyzer, I triangulated the source, the clubhouse. The same place Karen hosted her private meetings. My gut told me the HOA's server was being used to exchange data between the HOA and Allied Fiber, maybe maps, maybe payments. So I made another quiet move. The next week, I showed up at the HOA office during open hours, polite smile, clipboard in hand. Karen asked me to drop off these compliance forms. I told the clerk, a young college kid who barely looked up from his phone. While he checked his computer, I noticed an external hard drive plugged into the router. I slipped a small data logger onto the power strip behind the desk. It wasn't intrusive, just a passive monitor that logged data packet routes. Every night for the next week, I sat in my garage, sipping coffee and watching the activity blink across my monitor. The logger didn't copy files, but it tracked external connections, times, destinations, frequencies. What I saw confirmed everything. Karen's office system was transmitting data directly to a private server belonging to Allied Fiber Holdings, LLC. And because my ham antenna was licensed under federal communication rights, that meant any unauthorized interference with my setup, including her cutting my cables, was now part of a potential federal communications breach. I didn't need revenge anymore. I needed precision. I gathered everything, copies of the falsified map, the FOIA responses, the network logs, the altered meeting minutes. Then, one by one, I contacted the right people. First, a local property lawyer who specialized in HOA misconduct. We met at a small diner off the highway, and I laid out the documents between our coffee cups. He whistled low and said, "This isn't just an HOA dispute. This is fraud, and federal if the FCC gets involved." Then, I reached out to an old contact at the FCC's Enforcement Bureau. I didn't tell him everything, just enough, that my licensed ham setup had been intentionally damaged and that a local entity might be transmitting unauthorized data through private infrastructure. "Send what you've got," he said. "We'll review it." I sent everything, encrypted, time-stamped, traceable. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the docile homeowner. When Karen walked by, I waved. When she sent another final warning, I thanked her for her diligence. All while the case built quietly behind the scenes. Then, one evening, as the sun melted into the horizon and the cicadas started their soft hum, I saw it, a convoy of 3 black SUVs turning onto Maple Ridge Drive. No sirens, no flashing lights, just deliberate, heavy silence. They stopped at the clubhouse. Karen was inside for her executive session. From across the street, I took a slow sip of coffee and whispered to myself, the words I'd been holding for weeks. They had no idea what was coming. The air in Maple Ridge that evening felt different, too still, too heavy. From my porch, I watched the black SUVs idle under the soft glow of the streetlights, engines rumbling like distant thunder. The entire cul-de-sac had gone silent. Curtains shifted. Porch lights flicked on. Even the dogs had stopped barking. When the agent stepped out, their jackets glinting faintly under the sodium lamps, Karen came storming out of the clubhouse like a queen defending her castle. "Excuse me," she barked, her voice carrying across the street. "You can't just barge into private HOA property without." the lead agent raised a badge. Federal Communications Commission, Enforcement Division. We have a warrant. Her words faltered. The only sound that followed was the soft creak of the clubhouse door as one agent pushed it open and stepped inside. I didn't move. I just watched, quiet, steady. I didn't want to gloat. I just wanted to see truth finally have its moment. Inside, I could see the flicker of flashlights reflecting off polished wood and binders labeled Community Compliance. The agents moved with precision, unplugging drives, photographing computers, securing sealed folders. Karen stood frozen outside, arms crossed, muttering to herself. After what felt like hours, they walked out, boxes in hand. One paused beside her and said, "Ma'am, you'll need to come with us for questioning." Her face drained of color. Questioning? For what? Fraud, property falsification, and unauthorized transmissions over federal channels, he said flatly. The street was silent except for the soft click of handcuffs. The next morning, Maple Ridge was buzzing. Neighbors who once avoided me now stood in little clusters whispering. Rumors spread like wildfire, words like FBI raid, embezzlement, and illegal contracts. But I didn't join the gossip. I had work to finish. The legal process that followed was long, methodical, and oddly satisfying in its calmness. The HOA's fraudulent boundary documents were presented before the county court. My lawyer, a measured man with a slow drawl, laid out each piece of evidence like moves in a chess match. "Your Honor," he said, "the defendant, acting as HOA president, forged zoning records to benefit from a private deal with a telecommunications developer, using falsified community approval and manipulating property data." The courtroom was packed. Karen sat across from us, her composure cracking in small ways, a twitch at her jaw, a restless shuffle of papers. Then came the moment I'd waited for. My lawyer placed a printed image before the judge, a time-stamped packet route map showing transmissions between the HOA server and Allied Fiber Holdings. The judge leaned forward. "This came from where, exactly?" I spoke for the first time that day. "From my ham monitoring logs, Your Honor. I'm a licensed communications engineer. The data confirms unauthorized frequency use, from the defendant's system." You could hear the room inhale. The sound of the judge's gavel echoed softly, once, twice, a punctuation of realization. When the verdict came, it was quiet, almost tender. The court found Karen guilty of falsifying property records, unauthorized data transmission, and misappropriation of HOA funds. Her presidency was stripped immediately. The HOA board was dissolved pending re-election under county supervision. But the real moment, the one that stayed with me, came weeks later, during the property restitution hearing. The county surveyor, a man with a clipboard and soft voice, walked the edge of my backyard with careful steps. He paused by the spot where the red, pending violation, stake still leaned in the dirt, faded by weather. He pulled it out gently and handed it to me. "Mr. Lane," he said, "this corner, and everything on it, is yours. Permanently reinstated." The breeze carried the sound of leaves rustling like a sigh of relief. Ellen was standing by the porch, tears glinting in her eyes. I smiled at her, not because I'd won, but because it was finally over. A month later, the story hit the local news. The headline read, "HOA President Arrested for Fraud, Neighborhood Hero Uncovers Corruption." The reporter wanted an interview. I declined. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted quiet. The new HOA, now run by reasonable people, invited me to be their communications advisor. I politely refused. I'd spent enough of my life managing signals, I didn't need to decode people anymore. One evening, I returned to my radio. I reconnected the cables Karen had cut, each click of the connector sounding like closure. Static filled the room, soft and familiar. I turned the dial until a voice from across the world came through, calm, distant, steady. "Good evening, this is Echo 9 Charlie, checking in." I smiled and replied, "Copy that, Echo 9 Charlie. Signals clear." For a long moment, I just listened. The world hummed again, alive, connected. Outside, Maple Ridge glowed under the evening sun. Kids laughed, sprinklers hissed, and the air smelled of cut grass instead of conflict. And though peace had returned, I knew it hadn't come from vengeance. It had come from patience, from letting the truth find its own frequency. As I shut down the radio for the night, I glanced once more at that empty spot where the red stake had been and whispered, "Justice doesn't need noise, it just needs clarity." It's been 6 months since the black SUVs left Maple Ridge, but their memory still lingers like the echo of thunder after a storm, distant, powerful, and strangely cleansing. Life has gone quiet again, though in a very different way. The kind of quiet that feels earned. The lawns still shimmer in the morning dew, the same mailboxes still stand in perfect rows, and the neighborhood pond still reflects the evening sun. But something fundamental has shifted, a layer of honesty that wasn't there before. The new HOA board is smaller, humbler. Meetings are open now, not invitations only. People actually smile when they wave, not because they're supposed to, but because they want to. As for me, I've gone back to simple pleasures. My mornings start with coffee and static, the hum of my ham radio reconnecting me to voices across oceans. Sometimes Ellen sits beside me, reading while I listen to transmissions from places I'll never see. I don't think she understands the codes or signals, but she understands what they mean to me. That connection is still possible, even after walls of silence and betrayal. I learned that revenge doesn't always come in flames or fury. Sometimes, the most powerful justice is quiet, patient, like a signal traveling through static until it finds the right receiver. Karen eventually took a plea deal. Last I heard, she moved 2 towns over, far from Maple Ridge, far from leadership. I don't hate her. In some strange way, I'm even grateful. She reminded me that truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to persist. The antenna stands taller now, not as a defiance, but as a symbol. Proof that doing the right thing might take time, but it resonates longer than any noise made in haste. Sometimes, when I tune in at dusk and hear a voice break through the static, I think about everything that's happened, the lies, the silence, the justice, and I smile. Because peace, when it finally arrives, doesn't announce itself. It simply hums, steady and clear. Static fades. Truth doesn't.
Hope you enjoyed this journey into the world of HOA secrets. Remember, behind every door, there's a story waiting to shock you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more.